Hey there, gluten-free friends, and welcome to our Tuesday chats. We have some special guests for you today. Our friend Lacy Estelle. She is joining us today to share her gluten-free journey of inspiration for many people. Lacy and I connected because I was looking for people living gluten-free, how it's changed their lives, and we're talking about being grateful for our gluten-free life and being grateful for what gluten-free has given us, right? We don't just live gluten-free for celiac disease or because we're gluten intolerant, but being gluten-free can help so many people in different ways. And Lacy is a testament to that. So Lacy, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let me read you her introduction, and then we'll let her tell us more about herself. So Lacy Estelle is a follower of Jesus. She is a white mother and an ADHD woman. She began writing about encouragement, surviving an abusive relationship, and parenting her ADHD kiddos while having ADHD herself. And since then, she's published lots of content on those subjects in her original blog, Mothering the Storm. I love that title. And in her podcast, An ADD Woman with Lacy Estelle. So tell us a little bit about, you started your podcast and your blog just from everything that you were going through, your personal experiences.
Yeah, so actually my journey with gluten-free living actually starts even before my ADHD journey.
Oh,
So
wow.
I way back in like 2016, I was going through a divorce and I was really tired of being tired all the time. I was exhausted all the time.
Mhm.
Um I didn't feel good. I didn't have any energy.
Mhm.
And I came across low inflammation dieting, which was basically also like an elimination diet.
Yep.
So I basically just said, something's got to give. I'm gonna dive headfirst into this and see if it helps me. And I come to figure out on my own of eliminating it that gluten, and most of the time dairy as well,
Mhm.
really caused problems for me. And through that, I actually recovered a lot of the energy that I had lost.
Great.
I lost a bunch of weight, and I felt really, really good. There was still some part of me that I could tell I was struggling to navigate, but it was a lot less disruptive.
Okay.
Um, and it wasn't until the following school year when my oldest son was struggling really, really bad in school. And that's when we pursued a diagnosis to find out if he did have ADHD.
Mhm.
And then through that diagnosis is when I ended up looking into my own diagnosis as well. Because,
Uh,
they hand you as a parent, they hand you this questionnaire and they're like, oh, fill this out and let us know how often these things are happening or occurring with him. And I'm like looking at it and I'm marking it off for him, but I'm thinking to myself, like, this is a lot like me.
mhm.
So what we ended up doing at first, because, as a parent, you're always kind of apprehensive to do something along the lines of putting your child on medication. And so at first I offered to him, I said, mommy has done a lot of things in the way of changing her lifestyle and changing her eating habits that
Mhm.
I felt it didn't completely treat my ADHD because it
Mhm.
doesn't. But what it did do is it made it so that even when I wasn't on medication, I felt like I could manage my life.
Mhm.
And I think when I really dug into the neuropsychology of all of that and finding out that, if you do have a gluten intolerance or a dairy intolerance and the way it affects your brain,
Mhm.
and the way it can just kind of turn off your cognitive ability. I think that coupled with the ADHD I was already trying to compensate for was what made the low inflammation dieting and the gluten-free lifestyle um so I want to say like lucrative for me, but just
Mhm.
so helpful.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
originally we changed my son's diet.
Mhm.
We took him off of gluten and dairy and all sorts of other things. He was in second grade.
Mhm.
When we got about 4 weeks into it, he said, Mom, this is helping, but I'm hungry all the time.
Aw.
And so I was like, okay. So we ended up for him kind of shifting more towards just a lifestyle change that didn't necessarily remove gluten completely,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
allowed for him to still have snacks and things. And then we did move towards medication. And then I did get to a point too
mhm,
where even with my gluten-free lifestyle and everything else, the stress level of my life became to where I was like, okay, I think I'm going to consider medication as a supplement to the
mhm,
lifestyle I'm already living.
mhm,
But yeah, that is how I came to live gluten free, and it's been about hmm, let's see, I think 6 going on 7 years now, and I just can't look back. I I've
mhm,
also gotten to a
mhm.
point now
Right.
where it's I've been doing it so long that I've practiced everything. I make almost everything gluten free and my husband can't tell. So
Oh, right, right, right,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. No, none of this, "Oh, gluten-free is disgusting, and they're not gonna eat it."
Mm-mm.
I don't believe in
Mm-mm.
that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. Gluten itself causes a lot of inflammation in the body. And when you do
Mhm.
take that out, that not only helps your gut, but it definitely impacts your brain, right? And you have a lot of that gut brain connection where ADHD comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing about ADHD is usually it's a lack of dopamine, norepinephrine, and
Mhm.
sometimes also serotonin. So a lot of times, especially women, we'll struggle with dieting because our brains are constantly craving stimulation. So
Right.
we'll always want to reach for like bread or
Mhm.
cheese, which I always joke and say cheese is
Jeez.
like crack
Mhm, mhm.
because your
Yep,
brain literally gets so addicted to it, and then the bread and the
exactly.
gluten, it's like a perfect combination where they add, you've got the wheat and the gluten in it, and then you've also got all these other neurotoxins like high fructose corn syrup and
Oh,
sugar
yes.
and all sorts of things.
Mhm,
And so, you're consuming these because as a woman, you are craving some sort of energy. But the problem
mhm.
actually is these things are actually zapping your energy and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
When you have ADHD, because you have a lack of the norepinephrine and the dopamine in your brain, and
Mhm,
you're always looking for stimulation, mm, you tend to overeat.
mhm,
Um, I've
mhm.
met lots of women who will say, well, I think I need to fix my relationship with food. And I will say that's probably true because you don't realize it that you're self-medicating with food and you're
Oh,
self-medicating with like the
absolutely.
feel good foods. My mom says she now adheres also to a gluten-free diet. And she says
Mhm,
that she's like a recovering pastaholic because pasta was just like a constant go-to for her. And
mhm.
what we ended up figuring out is that, when you take the gluten out of the pasta, one, it still tastes great, but you don't feel the need to eat 5 bowls of pasta over and over again. You
Yep.
can just have one and be satisfied.
Mhm,
Um, and
exactly.
yeah, that gut brain connection that you mentioned too is just huge because they're finding out more and more information now that they're realizing all of the precursors and all of the things that we need to be able to actually
Mhm,
create those hormones in our brain and
mhm,
those not necessarily hormones, sorry, those basically the precursors to creating dopamine and
mhm,
norepinephrine and everything else. It all
right.
comes from our gut. So
Mhm,
I've read several studies that say, serotonin is directly linked to your gut health.
mhm,
So, if you're struggling with depression or anything along
yep.
those lines with mental health, you really should look at what you're eating. And it always floors me when people say, oh, diet has nothing to do with ADHD. And I'm like, um, while I will admit that diet does not cure ADHD,
Mhm,
um, there are circumstances a lot of the times where people like me, we don't always want to take medication or we can't take medication.
yes. Yeah.
My oldest son is actually at that point now because he knows he wants to go into the military. The
Mm,
military has
mhm,
hard, fast rule on any sort of mental health medications. So
Yeah,
he
yeah.
has gone off his medication, and
Mhm,
we're looking, we're making sure his lifestyle changes are
mhm.
helping him enough to where he is able to manage it on his own. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
you can't say that, because if you're also the type of person that can consume, take an ice cream and then you're ready to take a nap, you can't tell me that, food doesn't affect how you feel. So,
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I was told that for years. I mean, I had all kinds of medical issues and I was told, well, food is, I'm like, it's something I'm eating. I know I eat something and I feel so sick. And then I was told that so many times, oh, food has nothing to do with how you're feeling. Food has everything to do with how we're feeling and how our body responds and how our body acts. So I love that you say that, gluten-free, going gluten-free isn't going to heal ADHD, but
mm-mm,
it can manage ADHD. And that's so important to understand because you're getting rid of that inflammation and you're taking that away. And that just like lightens everything up, right?
it really does. It really does. I was amazed at how good I felt after
Mhm,
getting rid of it. And I still am amazed all the time too that I can eat. And like you
mhm,
said, like you had all these problems for a long time. I grew up my whole life having a stomach ache after
mhm,
every meal
Yep,
and never
yep.
knowing that that was like a not normal thing. I just thought
Well,
everybody had that.
exactly.
And so yeah, when I went gluten-free, and on all the meals that I make, I can actually consume them and I don't have indigestion. I don't have the gas or the bloating or the
Hmm.
just being
Hmm.
uncomfortable.
Yep.
It floored me, and I was like, I can't believe that nobody pointed this out to me sooner.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. You
Mm-mm.
should eat and feel good. You shouldn't
Mhm.
eat and after every meal feel like, how you feel after your Thanksgiving meal because you way overindulged. Like you
Mhm.
shouldn't feel like that every day when you eat. And
Mm-mm.
people do, and they don't realize the effect that food is having. So, just to acknowledge that and to understand that and then implement that for yourself and your family, that's a huge, huge win, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, it became one of those things where, for a long time, because of my ADHD and because like so many women struggle with their relationship with food when you have ADHD, because like
Hmm.
I said, you're craving that stimulation.
Hmm.
Um, for me to get to a point to where I instead wanted to feel good over wanting the quick fix or the sugar or the
Yeah.
anything along those lines,
Yeah.
um, was a big win for me because of the
Mhm.
fact that it had always been, well, 2 step forward, 3 steps back, that kind of thing with anything
Mhm.
else.
Right.
But I think it was also the fact that any diet prior to removing gluten and dairy that I clearly can't tolerate was allowing me those foods still in, and any
Mhm.
little bit of them is just like, for somebody whose brain is dependent on those things to give them that
Mhm.
stimulation, it
Yes.
almost was like people saying, you're like you told me before, you're a little bit pregnant,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not really a thing, so to expose myself
Mhm.
over and over again, yes, I could cut calories, but
Yeah.
I was still exposing myself to that neurotoxin that just was wreaking
Yep.
havoc on me. And so
Yep.
it didn't really matter how long I stuck to some sort of diet, because at the end of the day, I knew that I was eventually going to be like, well, I can have pizza today, or I can have cake
Mhm.
today,
Mhm.
because my body would still crave it because it wasn't actually rid of it. I didn't actually
Exactly.
remove it completely. So
Exactly.
that was a
Yeah.
huge thing for me to figure out. But once I did remove it and I got past those, I'd say the first 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, it got
Mhm.
easy. It got easier. It's still not always easy. I
Mhm.
have to that. I'm like, it's
Right.
still not always
Right.
easy. I had a relationship in the past that he used to tell me, he's like, why don't you just like eat what you want? I'm like, because I don't want to feel awful. Um,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that's really what it comes down to. It's just a matter of being able to prioritize the way you feel and the way
Mhm.
food makes you feel, as opposed
Mhm.
to, the quick fix of feel good hormones. I mean, we still have gluten-free treats.
Mhm.
We do. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a
Yeah.
necessity sometimes, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's
Absolutely.
um I don't overindulge like I used to. So,
Exactly. I totally hear you on that. Um, and I had a point here. It's like a sugar craving, you think, okay, if you eat sugar, you want more sugar, and then you want
mhm,
more sugar, and you want more, and gluten is the same thing. You eat a
mhm,
little bit and you want more, and you want more, and you want more, and until you stop and look at that and take it out, you don't feel like so many people don't even realize that it is bothering them, right? Or that the difference that they can make by taking that out,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the one thing I used to tell my mom because she knew she wanted and she needed like to go gluten free and she would do it for a little while, but then
Mhm,
she'd be like, well, I'll just have a little bit. And I'm like, you have to not do that to yourself. And then what would
mhm,
happen for her was, her reaction would be delayed. So it'd be like 3, 4 days later, she'd be cranky, she'd be
mhm,
irritable. And
mhm.
I would tell her, I'm like, that was that gluten that you ate. She's like, no, I don't think it was. I'm like, yes, it was. I'm telling you it was. I said,
You see it, you see it,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you
yeah.
definitely see it. And for me, it's, my husband, he eats all the things that I cook, and I only eat what I cook for the most part.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
he gets
mhm.
a lot of gluten free, but of course he goes to work and eats out of the vending machines and things along those lines. And I tell him, I'm like, the weeks that I notice that you really adhere to only eating the things I pack for you or what I'm cooking for dinner or whatever,
Mhm.
you have a lot more energy. And he's like, no, I
Wow,
don't really think so. And I'm like,
yeah,
no, I can tell you right
yeah.
now, there was a time, there was a week or so where he was really trying to be, diligent with just eating exactly what I prepared.
Mhm.
And by that weekend, he was like, okay, I think I'll go work in the yard and I'm gonna go do this, this, and this. And I was like,
A lot more
okay,
energy, yeah.
yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's probably because you ate decent all week. And he's like, I don't think there's a
Mhm.
correlation. I'm like, okay, well, there's a correlation for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and learning that correlation, but sticking with it, like you have to
Mhm.
have a reason behind it. I used to run a cleanse every year, and the women would go in the cleanse and they would, no gluten, no dairy, no soy, no eggs. And they would come out and say, wow, I feel great. But they'd go back to eating gluten.
Yeah,
And they'd
I
even
know.
say, oh, I'm all foggy again. Like, okay, so what should we do about that now? Well, but
Right,
I don't have celiac disease or gluten intolerance, so I can eat the gluten. But if it's making you foggy and if it's making your energy is drained and it's causing you these other issues, let's look at that, right?
right.
But making a change is not easy,
Yeah.
and being gluten free, I like to say it's easy and delicious, but I know it's not easy. It's easy when you have the right tools and the steps and the strategies and the support that you need to create a gluten free life. But
Mhm.
it's not always easy to maintain, and like you said, having people around you who might not be supportive or aren't on board with you, and just eat what you want. Well, when we eat what we want, we're sick, so
We're
there's
sick.
no, we don't want that. You might think that you want that, but then you eat it and you're like, oh my god, I didn't want that. Right, so
Mm-mm,
eating eating just a little, like I have big talks in my group about that. We don't eat just a little bit, right?
mm-mm,
You can't have that.
no,
You can't have a little on the weekend and be okay, because you're just
mm-mm.
sabotaging yourself.
You are. And I think that, it's like any addiction,
Mhm,
if you talk to a recovering addict, they'll tell you it wasn't until they recognized that they couldn't do it just a little bit. Like I always hear of people who are going through like therapy for smoking cigarettes, and I've never had that
mhm,
addiction, so I can't completely relate, but I know that, they first will tell you, well, stop smoking all the places you normally smoke. Well, if you're addicted to something, all you're going to do is find places you don't normally smoke so that you can still go smoke.
right, right,
And
right,
so, the same thing with gluten. And for me, when I got through it and I realized how much it affected me, I looked into possibly doing a test and then found out that to do the test, I would have to consume it for 6 weeks. And I was like, no, I'm
yeah,
good. I'll just know it about myself. And I don't even care if I get
yes.
made fun of by people who are like, really, like, even, like, because you go to restaurants and you have to be that picky eater who says,
Mhm. Mhm.
can I have your gluten-free menu? And then if they don't have one, you have to say, okay, is there anything in your kitchen that's baked? All those types of things because of cross
Mhm.
contamination. And
Mhm.
I will say I'm probably not as sensitive as friends of mine and things along those lines. Sometimes I can get away with soy sauce in a restaurant that I know is probably fermented wheat.
Mhm.
Um, I imagine it probably has to do with the fact that it is fermented. Um, but otherwise, it's still like if it sneaks into my food, the following day, I will feel like I had the flu. And my husband will ask me, he's
Mhm.
like, well, do you think you're coming down with something? I'm like, no, I ate something. I know I did. I don't know what it was, but
Yeah.
I ate something. I'll get a specific kind of headache that's like right at the back of my neck,
Yeah.
and I will just feel awful. Like I will wish that I had the flu so that I know it will
Mhm.
pass, but
Yeah.
instead it will last.
Yeah.
I always tell people, I'm like, it's like a hangover. And I don't even really hardly drink it, but that's the
Oh,
best thing I
right.
can explain
Right. Right. Right.
how it
Right.
feels.
Right.
And everybody knows how functional or non-functional you are when you are trying to work on a hangover. It's
Mhm.
not, it's never going to work.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. But I love
mm-mm,
how intuitive you become with your body though, like how you feel. That's the same thing. My husband will say the same thing to me. Oh, you're catching a cold. Nope. Nope. It's something got me.
something I ate.
And
Hmm.
the reaction your body's going to have, whether it's that day or the next day, and you know how long it's going to last. So wanting that food and cheating to have gluten and that how you're going to feel, I think is such a push not to do that, right?
Hmm. Well, and I tell people too that I'm like, listen, I know that everybody says like, well, I want to lose weight, but I still want to eat what I want.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. In the beginning, it seems harder to go cold turkey off of all
Mhm.
of the things that you thought you
Yeah.
loved.
Yeah.
But in the long run, I found it to be so much easier to just say no to
Mhm.
that food and to not
Mhm.
even try it. Because it's the minute that I decide, oh well, I'll have one little bite that I want three,
Oh,
so
right, right, right,
four or
right,
five or my own
right,
serving. And I'm
right.
like, it's a lot easier to just push it aside.
Mhm.
Um, it's
Right.
not easier in the beginning, but it is easier in the long run.
As you go, right.
And it helps you to stay on top of things. It helps you to not sabotage those efforts and to feel better. And that's really at the
Yeah.
core of it. I wish, and I try so hard to get my husband, I'm like, don't you want to feel better? Don't you want
Mhm.
to sleep better? Don't you want all those things? And he's like, I mean, I do. But then, my buddy brings fruit snacks to work and I'm like, okay,
Right,
but I remember being there too. I remember that when I got to a point where I was like, something has to give. I have to change.
yeah.
There was probably nothing that could have stood in my way, even barren cupboards and having no idea how to cook gluten-free
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
was just not going to stop me because I was that determined to fix whatever was going on with me. Because
Yeah,
I had
I love
two,
that.
my oldest two they're older now, but at that time they were really young. And it felt like their mom just was like, I was just doomed to always have a weight problem the whole rest of my life. And I was doomed to always have an energy
Mhm.
problem the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And
Mhm. Yeah,
I didn't want that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, when you see the benefits you get out of going gluten-free and what it gives you, it is eye-opening, right? And you don't want to go back to feeling cruddy, right?
Mm-mm,
I mean, or bring it on yourself. So, we're not sitting here saying that going gluten-free is going to heal or cure ADHD, but it
mm-mm.
can absolutely help you manage it. And of course, everybody is different. But if it's something you're thinking about, or, certainly talk to me, certainly come and follow Lacy. So tell us where we can find you, Lacy.
So I have a blog, lacyestelle.com, and that's where I originally got started. That's primarily about the ADHD parenting journey.
Okay.
But I do talk on there. I made a blog post at one point of how we naturally were trying to treat ADHD because it went into more than just the low inflammation dieting. It also talked about
Mhm.
different supplements we added to our diet to try to
Okay,
help us with
great.
that energy and that, like you said, that gut brain access.
Mhm.
Um, And then I also host a podcast at anaddwoman.com. And that podcast, you can find it on all platforms. It's primarily for the ADHD woman, but sure, I have male listeners too. And the things that I try to kind of steer us through is navigating our mental health, you know, from a Christian perspective. But then I also have talked about, you know, the science of all the different things and, you know, how sometimes doing something like an elimination diet will help you to recognize, is it ADHD or is it celiac or is it something
Right,
else? You know,
right.
you really, and what I also tell people all the time too is, you know, if you take care of your diet and then maybe you add a supplement and then you get physically active and then you realize, okay, I still cannot overcome my symptoms. At that point, medication for you, you could take a very low dose and have significant improvement in your, you know, in your life. And I always tell people that because, you know, medication, as much as it helps, you don't want it to be the only thing that is working for your life. You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah,
working for
yeah.
you. Because at some point, I mean, honestly, if there's anybody in this group that has ADHD, they probably really know this. There is a shortage right now of ADHD medication. So a lot of people aren't even
Right,
able to get their medication.
right.
And so if you have always relied on, you know, your medication to get you through your day, well, it's time to start relying a little bit more on your habits and trying to change those things and really taking the reins of your life.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's great. That's a great point. And also remember that if you are going to go gluten-free, but you want to know if it is celiac disease or you have a gluten intolerance, then you need to do your testing first. Because just like Lacey said, after you're going gluten-free and you feel great, the last thing you want to do is go back and eat gluten for weeks before you can have your testing done because it will not come out correctly. And
mhm.
I've had clients who did that, who didn't, you know, they went gluten-free and then were tested and said, I don't have celiac, I'm all good. I'm like, no, wait a minute. You weren't eating gluten, so your testing is incorrect. And they're like, well, I'm not going to go and eat gluten now that I feel good, you know? So,
Mhm.
yeah, so you can really get mixed up there, but all right,
Yeah.
friends. Any last points, Lucy, you want to add for us?
Um, no, just that if, you know, if you are struggling with time management or you're struggling with just feeling like, you know, I like to tell people that I felt like the grown up that just was never going to grow up because I
Mhm,
couldn't do my regular day-to-day tasks. I couldn't keep up with my household. I couldn't keep up with,
mhm, right.
you know, just my day-to-day stress. If that sounds like you and you're like, I don't think I have ADHD, but maybe I do, I would totally recommend you coming and listening to my podcast. Just a few listens to see if it's something that you relate to, and maybe we can help each other. And then maybe your gluten-free lifestyle will become something entirely you know, self-treating for you as well. That could really, really help
Mhm.
you. So
Yeah.
that's it. That's
I
it.
love
That's all I
that.
got.
I love that. All right. So I will have all of her links down below so you can go follow her, go listen to her podcast. And thank you so much, Lacey, for joining us today. Great conversation. And until next time, everybody, have a delicious gluten-free day. Bye-bye.
Bye.